Black metal is full of tragedy. The entire genre is built on countless deaths, both murders and self-inflicted ones. But few bands have had the misfortune of Strid. They were one of the most original bands coming out of the Norwegian black metal scene in the 90s. Their work led to the creation of a brand new black metal subgenre, one that is still very active today. Despite this, every attempt to make new music following their legendary debut fell through, cut short by tragic events outside of the band's control. From prison sentences and car accidents to deaths of key band members, everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong. So, who is Strid and what is their legacy today? This is the story of the creation of depressive, suicidal black metal. Askim is a small Norwegian town located between the Oslo Fjord and Sweden, approximately 50 kilometers away from both. It has few people and even fewer landmarks to make it interesting to any outsiders. In the 70s and 80s, it became a booming industrial city due to the opening of a few factories, primarily making car parts and rubber boots. But by the end of the 80s, those factories closed, leaving the town to collapse again. Crime and drug use increased significantly. Due to its placement between Oslo and Sweden, it became a transit town and nothing more. A group of friends had grown up there during the town's collapse. With not much else to do, they devoted their time to music. Around 1989, they became aware of early black metal and started listening to Bathory, Venom and Celtic Frost, the same bands that went on to inspire the Norwegian black metal scene. By 91, they had become aware of a controversial band gaining infamy in their country, Mayhem. When its leader opened Helvete, a record store, they made it a point to go there. They were all between 15 and 17, and looked up to the slightly older Euronymous due to his commitment to the rising black metal scene. During their visit, Euronymous gave them early black metal demos that went on to inspire their musical tastes. Upon their return, they formed a black metal band of their own, named MALFEITOR. The band consisted of 4 members. Espen Andersen as the bassist and vocalist, going by Rot, Lars Fredrik Bergstrom as the guitarist, going by Samhain, Kenneth Haugen as the second guitarist, going by Funeral, and the drummer who went by Lost. The group dedicated themselves to black metal fully. In line with Euronymous' Black Circle, they formed their own exclusive in-group. People were only allowed to join if the band's members thought that they had something to contribute to the local scene. They developed a strong us versus them mentality with the residents of Askim who simply didn't understand black metal. Most of the locals hated them and suspected that they were part of the arson wave sweeping Norway. While the band's members openly supported the burnings ideologically, they were disconnected from the people doing the actual burning and didn't have the money to go and burn churches anyway. This conflict with the local populace escalated to physical altercations, with the members of MALFEITOR ending up getting into 10 to 12 fights to protect the integrity of their inner circle. By the end of their crusade, the residents of Askim were scared of the band more than anything. And by the end of 91, MALFEITOR released a 5-song demo. It was chaotic, aggressive, and pretty straightforward for early black metal. They made 13 copies and traveled to Helvete, where Euronymous agreed to listen to their tape. He played it to some of Helvete's customers, but not much more came from this release. They created a second demo in 92, titled Pandemonium. They followed a similar release strategy, and the music was still just as similar to all of the other bands coming up in the scene. However, that wouldn't be the case for long. The failure of Pandemonium would soon lead to the entire style of the band shifting, changing the black metal scene forever. Following the release of their second demo, they rebranded and restructured. The band changed their name to Battle, and then again shortly after to the Norwegian word for battle, Strid. This is the name they would be known under for the remainder of the band's existence. To accompany the band's name change, Espen changed his pseudonym from Rot to Storm. Lars started using his real name instead of Samhain, and Kenneth went from Funeral to HARJAR. Lost, the band's drummer, left entirely, leaving HARJAR to take up drumming in his place. The new name came with a new musical style, with the band opting for a slower, bleaker and more atmospheric approach. Their bass became a lot more prominent, and Storm used a different vocal approach, leading to a more tortured sound. Strid's music was largely influenced by their separation from the Oslo scene. Despite being only 50 kilometers away from Oslo, the Norwegian scene's center, the band remained mostly disconnected from it. All three of its members were broke students. They had no car and no money for buses that would take them to Oslo. The little money they did have was better spent on cigarettes and beer instead, so the group spent all of their time rehearsing. They occasionally did go to Helvete, but considered that more of a rare ritual than something that could be repeated frequently. They only visited the store if they were already going to a show in Oslo, making it a tradition to go to the record store before and after the gig. And considering that they were only able to go to Oslo a few times a year, they were always behind on the music coming out of Euronymous' Black Circle. As MALFEITOR, they desperately tried to keep up, resulting in all of their music sounding like the work other Norwegian bands had put out months if not years earlier. As Strid, they made it a point to separate themselves from Oslo willingly. Before the year was over, they released a new demo containing a single 11-minute song, titled End of Life. And for the first time in the group's history, their demo started spreading within the Oslo scene. It offered something unique, separating them from the countless other black metal bands that popped up during the Black Circle's arson campaign. In fact, the demo was so successful that it got the band its first record deal from the German label Malicious Records. They wanted to fund and release a Strid 7-inch. This is when the band decided to add a new member, one that would push Strid's style to evolve even further than the already unique approach they had on End of Life. Edvard Arset was a teen who had moved to Askim at the start of the 90s. He met the members of MALFEITOR at a youth club soon after. However, due to being a few years younger than them, he wasn't allowed into the band. He witnessed the creation of MALFEITOR's first two demos as a semi-outsider, being friends with the band members but never contributing to their music. Edvard was a musician though, under the alias of RAVN HARJAR. He was working on a one-man black metal project, but never ended up releasing anything publicly. By the time MALFEITOR released their first demo, he was already deeply entrenched in their inner circle. He traveled to Helvete with them during their few trips to Oslo and met Euronymous. He even organized gigs in Askim for some of the bands in Euronymous' circle, leading to Mayhem, Emperor and Enslaved performing in the small town. MALFEITOR's rebrand to Strid happened, but Edvard was still forbidden from joining the band. He decided to make it his mission to impress his peers to the point where they had no choice but to let him in. One day, while Strid was rehearsing in the local youth club, Edvard decided to play his own musical project on the club's sound system. All of the work he had put into becoming a better musician for the past few years paid off in an instant, as he was finally asked to become an official member of Strid. After hearing End of Life, Edvard liked the direction Strid was heading in. However, he wanted to make their music even more atmospheric, more down-tuned, and less technical. He found the process of playing music meditative. His goal with Strid was to make music that transported the listener into a similar meditative state. His main influences were Thorns and Burzum. He loved the way both projects create atmosphere, and listened to them repeatedly for inspiration. He believed that the key to creating musical atmosphere was having different instruments play different melodies, something that both Thorns and Burzum excelled in. However, Strid's one and only goal became creating a musical style that no one else had heard before. They were already very separate from both the Oslo and the Bergen scene, so they made a decision to keep things that way in order to prevent any foreign influence from polluting their musical approach. They still listened to black metal, but made a pact as a band to never copy another project's sound. If anything they composed even remotely reminded them of music they had already heard, the song was to be discarded straight away. To break some of their existing black metal influence, the band started listening to a lot of jazz. Edvard wanted this to be the primary inspiration for their upcoming EP, describing the ideal Strid song as jazz in a metal uniform. From now on, they would spend all of their time either playing music or walking in the woods. They stopped drinking and lost respect for the Oslo scene because they spent most of their time partying and getting drunk. In Strid's eyes, the Oslo scene was no longer true black metal, and Strid needed to carry the genre forward. Conflict emerged between Strid and all of their black metal peers due to these beliefs. The two bands they especially hated were Duheimsgar and Flureti, as both of them were also signed to malicious records. Strid couldn't stand bands that weren't true existing anywhere near their space, a conflict that escalated into multiple physical fights between the members of Strid and Flureti. Strid were no longer simply making music. They lived for and were willing to die for black metal. But this new hyper-purist style wasn't something that all of the band's members enjoyed. Up until Edvard's arrival into the band, LARS was the one composing all of Strid's work. The insistence on complete originality brought in by Edvard was quickly becoming too much for LARS. After Edvard started making suggestions for how to improve the band's material, rather than discussing the proposed changes, LARS simply stopped coming to rehearsals altogether. After around 6 months of LARS refusing to come to any of Strid's rehearsals, he was officially kicked out. This left Edvard and Espen in charge of composing the new material. They opted for an extremely strange approach to creating the EP. Their EP, self-titled, was going to be split into 2 tracks. Edvard was to work on writing and composing one of the sides, while Espen worked on the other. The goal was for each of them to complete a full track with no cooperation from the other. The other person would hear the track for the first time shortly before the recording session, and purely with the goal of rehearsing rather than to suggest any changes. They still had a third member, their drummer HARJAR. Well, HARJAR wasn't a drummer at all. He started in the band as a guitarist and had a very rudimentary understanding of drumming. In fact, he was losing interest in making music in the first place. He was fully willing to let his 2 bandmates compose the EP by themselves. The drums in both tracks were kept very simple for that reason, and HARJAR only rehearsed the tracks twice before recording. Surprisingly, the two songs ended up being cohesive. Because Edvard and Espen spent so long talking about what their band should sound like, their tracks worked really well together. They both had a hypnotic and dreamlike atmosphere, while also feeling immensely depressive and claustrophobic. They were tranquil and miserable at the same time. With both parties thrilled with the material they had crafted, the EP was recorded and ready to be released. The Strid EP was extremely well received within the black metal community. Both songs were haunting and provided a style that did not exist before. In contrast with most of black metal, the guitars were thin and ghostly, contrasted by Espen's tortured vocals. It was so successful, in fact, that it led to the creation of a lot of copycats. People loved Strid's style and wanted to evolve it further, leading to bands like Bethlehem, Silencer, Shining, and Forgotten Tomb, who all cite Strid as a major inspiration. It kickstarted an entire parallel black metal scene, later dubbed Depressive Suicidal Black Metal or DSBM, with Strid's self-titled EP existing as the first DSBM record ever. While bands like Thorns and Burzum had tracks that echo elements of DSBM, with Vargvikernes even stating that Burzum is all about the longing for escape deep-rooted in human nature, these DSBM elements were mostly contained to single tracks. Strid was the first release entirely rooted in the emerging DSBM style. And Strid wanted to solidify this new approach to black metal with the creation of their first album. Their plan was to create a single perfect album that would serve as the prototype for an entirely new style and disband after that. With the album out, their goal to create truly unique music would be complete. Anything more would only dilute their output. According to Edvard, they didn't want to fall into the trap so many other black metal bands were falling into. Making multiple albums would lead them to either rehashing the same musical style over and over again, or evolving it into something that no longer resembled the style of music they wanted to make. Both results went against what Edvard and Espen wanted Strid to become. But this album wouldn't come, as the band started facing hardship before the EP was even released. As mentioned before, their drummer HARJAR was already losing interest in making music. He was barely involved in the creation of the EP, his contribution ending at playing the drums in their recording session. He had no desire to continue with Strid, and dropped out as soon as the two songs were recorded. It doesn't seem like he ever released any music after his time with the band, resigning to a quiet, normal life separate from his black metal days. A bigger hit came from the departure of Espen, one of the two minds behind the EP. The day after the songs were recorded, Espen went in for military service and left Askim altogether. He was in the army for 9 months. Shortly before coming home, he stabbed a fellow soldier with a knife for an unknown reason. He was taken to prison, and it would take an additional year for him to be released and returned back to Askim. In the meantime, Edvard moved to his grandparents' farm in the mountains. Months would pass between conversations with Espen, and the idea of Strid effectively stopped existing. In 1997, the two reunited for the first time since the EP's recording. It wouldn't take long for them to start talking about making music together again. In need of a drummer, they brought LARS back into the picture, and after hearing the EP, he was satisfied with the way his style evolved from End of Life and was willing to work with the duo on perfecting it. The three of them started playing music together regularly. They wrote a lot of new material, but weren't in a rush to professionally record any of it, wanting to compose a perfect album before committing any of it to tape. According to Edvard, they were horrible at DIY recording, so they never tried doing that either. As years had passed and all of their original contacts from Oslo were either dead or in prison, they no longer had any connection to the larger black metal scene. In addition to that, the whole group lacked motivation to network or give interviews, preferring to make music solitarily in Askim. Despite that, they still got offers from around 10 different labels who wanted to fund their first album based on the EP's success. Metallian even created a new label called Triumph of Death purely with the goal of releasing Strid's first album. But as time passed, the band still had no material they were entirely confident with, and the offers slowly dwindled. The band's motivation to make music faded out over time too. Edvard was still entirely committed to releasing a perfect album demonstrating the style they had developed, but the same couldn't be said for his bandmates. Lars's interest in the project disappeared, with him becoming completely ambivalent to the goals they had originally set. Espen was spending more and more time painting. By the end of their run, he no longer desired to become a musician at all, preferring a career as an oil painter. His primary goal became getting into the National Academy of Art. He never officially quit the band, but he stopped coming to rehearsals, preferring to spend his time working towards his entry into the academy. Edvard tried to remain motivated for a while, but eventually realized that it wasn't feasible for him to create the album by himself. He gave up too, and Strid disbanded yet again. The new millennium came and went with no album in sight. In 2001, Edvard was living in Oslo, while Espen and Lars were still in Askim. It had been a year and a half since the trio last spoke to each other. Edvard had been thinking about bringing Strid back for a while. Other bands like Silencer, Bethlehem and Shining were popping up, all finding success with the style of music Edvard's band pioneered. The idea of the perfect album they never released began haunting him. He decided to go back to Askim and pitch the idea of Strid reuniting to Espen. When he arrived to the small town, Espen's spirits were down. Edvard later remarked that Espen was always hard on himself, putting pressure on himself to perform to the maximum of his abilities in every aspect of his life. He saw Strid's unfinished album as a personal failing, and the fact that he had been rejected from the National Academy of Art since he and Edvard last met did not help. Nevertheless, he was enthusiastic with the idea of Strid reuniting and finally finishing their legendary album. Edvard and Espen spent the day jamming together and making plans for Strid's future success. After the jam session, they decided to go for a walk. There was a place they fished at growing up, and the two decided to revisit it as a way of reminiscing on the old days. The fishing spot required them to cross a railroad bridge, one of Askim's only landmarks. They stood on it for a while, talking. Edvard recalls that it was spring or early summer. All of the ice from the mountains was melting and the river below them was very aggressive. Unprompted, Espen said that if you jump down there you will die. It's not possible to come up because of the vortex and all of the power of the water. It will drag you down. Following their walk, the duo locked in plans to start working on the album again and Edvard left. He went on a short trip to New York, excited for Strid's reunion upon his return. But instead of a reunion, he received a call from Lars after returning to Oslo, stating that Espen was missing. Not long after, a text from Lars followed. Espen was found drowned. He had jumped into the river from the railway bridge he and Edvard spoke at only a few weeks earlier. With Espen gone, the idea of Strid's reunion faded into the background. But in 2003, Edvard got into a serious motorcycle crash and spent 6 months in the hospital. He came very close to dying but survived, losing his leg in the process. With his near-death experience behind him, the unreleased album haunted him again. He was still drawn to Strid's style and began writing new material for the band by himself. Strid's famous EP was written entirely by him and Espen. A lot of the music they had composed together died with Espen, as Edvard did not feel comfortable playing any of the tracks Espen helped co-create without him. But there was still another surviving member of Strid that helped create their style, the person responsible for the composition of End of Life, Lars Fredrik Bergström. After spending a few years working on new music, Edvard discussed the idea of starting Strid back up again with Lars. Lars was interested, but knew that they needed new members to replace Espen. In 2009, Strid was officially back together, this time accompanied by Duheimsgar's Yusuf Vikotnik Parvez and Sigmund Hansen, the same band they had conflict and fought with a decade and a half prior. They didn't need to write any new material. There was already so much music written by Edvard during his years in Oslo, and all of Strid's new members were happy to proceed with using that for Strid's Faded album. They started the process of recording all of Edvard's material. They ended up with about 2 albums worth of music recorded, the best of which was going to be chosen for Strid's perfect album. However, the producer they were working with revealed that they wanted 25% of the album's profits in exchange for his services. Rather than giving in to the producer's demands, they abandoned all of the work they had recorded and decided to start over with another producer. Following this, Lars revealed that he had his own music that he wanted Edvard to listen to. Similarly to him, Lars had spent the past 10 or so years working on new Strid material by himself in case of a potential future reunion. Edvard was impressed and considered it worthy of inclusion on the album. The plans of re-recording the material they already had were halted, as they now wanted the album to be written by both of them. They spent a few years writing new music for Strid together, using up all of their time rehearsing and perfecting Strid's style. And by the end of 2013, they were finally ready to record again. But this recording session never came to be. On the 7th of January 2014, before any of their new music could be recorded, Lars was found dead in his apartment. While the cause of death has never been public, Edvard stated in an interview that Lars died of a heart attack due to him pushing his body too hard for too long. And with Lars dying, his music died with him. Just like with Espen, Edvard was not comfortable with playing any of Lars's music post-mortem. He scrapped all of the work they had composed together, and Strid fell apart yet again. As the band's sole survivor, the album became a curse in Edvard's life. He had no connections to the modern black metal scene, living on a farm with his wife and 2 sons. But despite everything, he knew that the one thing he needed to do was release Strid's Faded album. In an interview with Dial Patterson, he said that he won't be able to rest until the album is released into the world and Strid's story is finally over, seeing the album's eventual release as the removal of a huge burden in his life. He restarted Strid again in 2019 with Vikotnik and Sigmund. Edvard was now the only person left in charge of writing material for Strid's first and final album. They announced that the album will be released by Prophecy Productions, a label that previously released work by Bethlehem and Silencer, bands inspired by Strid that became some of the most renowned within the DSBM subgenre. 6 years later though, the album is nowhere to be seen. There have been no updates regarding when and if it will finally be coming out, and considering the fact that 30 years have passed since Strid's only releases, it doesn't seem like the album will ever be out. Strid holds an interesting position within the black metal genre. The style of music they pioneered was so iconic that their entire subgenre is essentially based off of only 3 songs. They were brought up in interviews as a major influence by all of the bands that formed the foundation of DSBM, putting them on the level of Burzum or Dark Throne within their musical niche. The difference is that, while Burzum and Dark Throne released entire albums before they reached the status they are at now, Strid solidified a brand new approach to musicianship with a total output of only 25 minutes of music. But despite how revolutionary End of Life and the Strid EP were, most of the modern DSBM fans have no idea who Strid are. They are far from popular, and only get brought up in discussions over what constituted the first DSBM release, cursed to fall into obscurity within their own subgenre. So, who were Strid? They were a group of friends from a small town that became obsessed with pioneering a brand new musical genre through the release of a single perfect album. Yet every single attempt to do so was cut short by tragedy, time and time again preventing them from achieving this goal until there were no people left alive to even attempt to do this. Despite everything though, they did create a new genre, a genre that lives on to this day, charged by the 3 songs the group made before they were even 20. While they didn't do it in the way they originally wanted to, they succeeded in their goal, existing as the unknown trendsetters immortalized through every DSBM project playing their style of music today. They were depressive suicidal black metal, and will continue to be that whether their perfect album ever releases or not.